Hello friends! In this video, I'm going to be breaking down how I made my Jedi robes. Before getting into it, I do want to just say that as I'm making this video, I am not part of any official cosplay group, although I did follow the guidelines for Rebel Legion Standard Jedi, which I will leave a link to down below. I'll also do my best to link as many of the materials as I used. Okay, so I'm going to start with my pants. And for these, I'm just making pretty much straightforward, loose-fitting pants with an elastic waistband. For this, you're going to need about 2 yards of your fabric of choice, plus enough 3/8 inch elastic to go around your waist about 3 times. I made my pattern by tracing a pair of loose pajama pants, but you can use pretty much any pattern for pajamas, scrubs, whatever works. Whichever pattern you end up using, you'll have a back piece and a front piece that should look something like this. Pin and cut out 2 of your front piece and 2 of your back. You'll also need a waistband that is 5 inches wide and a couple inches longer than the waist of your pants. If you're using a pattern that comes with a waistband, feel free to use that instead. With the 2 back pieces right sides together and the 2 front pieces right sides together, pin along that curved crotch seam and sew. I'm doing this with a regular straight stitch. So because the fabric I'm using frays quite a bit, I ended up trimming that seam allowance with pinking shears and then folding over and top stitching to help combat that. You can finish off your seams however you'd like for the fabric that you're using. After that, you're going to lay your front on your back, right sides together, and then pin and sew along the inseam. Then, we're going to pin the outer seams and sew that as well. And then just a quick check to make sure they fit okay. Now for the waistband. I'm marking 1 inch from the long side of the waistband all the way down with a water-soluble pencil. Then I'm going to fold the edge to this point and iron it down so that I'll get a crease 1/2 inch from the edge. And I'm doing this on both sides. It should look something like this. Then I'm going to fold it in half and iron again. And now I'm going to mark 1/2 inch from the short edge and pin that to the waistband so that this mark lines up with the center back seam. Now pin the right side of the waistband to the wrong side of the pants all the way around. Once we reach the beginning, I'm going to mark the spot that overlaps with the mark we made earlier. Take out a few pins to give us some room, and then sew the waistband into a loop at that spot. I do it this way instead of trying to cut the waistband exactly and fixing it afterwards. You're welcome to do whatever method works for you, I just find this to be the easiest. I'm also going to sew it flat to reinforce it and help put elastic in later. And once that's done, we can pin it down and sew around the whole seam. Trim that with pinking shears to reduce fraying, then fold the waistband over. Mark a section at the back seam about 4 inches wide. Leaving that 4 inch section open, we're going to sew with a straight stitch all the way around the top of the waistband, 1/2 inch from that center fold. Then you're going to make 2 more channels, each 1/2 inch wide, leaving that little section open again. This will give us a total of 3 1/2 inch channels. Lastly, fold under the bottom folded edge that we ironed earlier. Top stitch about 1/8 inch from the folded edge. Next, grab your elastic and cut 3 pieces that are snug but not too tight around your waist. You can use a loop turner for this if you have one. I'm just putting a safety pin on one end and feeding the pieces through, starting with that top channel. Once you get to the beginning, join the ends and close the channel. Then repeat on the other 2 channels and close up that bottom edge. Lastly, we just need to do the bottom hem. Since these are going to be tucked into boots all the time, I'm just folding the bottom edge 1/2 inch twice and top stitching it. I'm doing this by marking at 1 inch and 1.5 inches and folding to each line. And then you should have something that looks like this. And I don't have footage because I made these a couple years ago now, but I also wanted to show my usual pants. They're pretty much the same design, but I made them about twice my waist measurement and gathered them down to size. The waistband is pretty much the same setup with the raw edges sandwiched inside, but I started with a piece 11 inches wide so that it would be 5 inches at the end, and then I put a zipper on the back and tucked in the sides. Next up, we're going to be doing the inner tunic. My inner tunic is a full shirt because I find it to be the most comfortable, but since only the front bit is actually visible, you can also just make a dickie for this. My older version was a dickie tacked onto a long sleeve shirt so that it would stay in place better. You're going to need around 1.5 yards of your fabric of choice, plus either a couple inches of Velcro or a handful of snap clips. To make the pattern for this, I started with a simple t-shirt pattern. Trace a straight line from the edge of the collar to a spot about 3 inches below the armpit. The back and the sleeves can stay the same. And the neckband will be 1 strip, as long as the entire neckline plus a couple of inches and 5 inches wide. Cut out 2 fronts, 2 sleeves, and 1 back on the fold. Layer front panels on top of the backs, right sides together and sew. The same as before, I laid these seam allowances flat and stitched over them for extra support. If your fabric doesn't fray as much as mine, you can probably skip the reinforcement. Next, lay the sleeves onto the main piece right sides together and stitch it the same way. Now lay the shirt closed and pin the seam running along the sleeve and side of the body. Since I can't really top stitch here, I'm trimming it with pinking shears and going over the seam allowance with a zigzag stitch. I'm hemming the sleeves the same way as the pants by folding up 1/2 inch twice and top stitching. If you want a prettier hem, you can do that, but this won't generally be visible. Next, we're going to grab that neckband. On an older version of this, I put interfacing in the neckband, but I found it to be too stiff and it just didn't look nice. Mark 1 inch from the long edges to iron down pretty much the same way as we did the pants waistband. And just like the pants, we're going to pin along the neckline with the right side of the band to the wrong side of the tunic. I'm starting at the center of the neck to make sure that everything is even. Stitch along the crease 1/2 inch from the edge, then fold at the center. Tuck under the other edge and top stitch. Next, I'm going to top stitch the other side and down the middle. I like this detail, but again, you can skip it if you want to. Now I'm trimming the edge of the band to be flush with the sides of the front panels. I'm going to fold these sides over twice and top stitch. And we're going to hem the bottom the same way. Again, if you want a prettier hem, you're welcome to, but I'm skipping that step since this won't be visible. Lastly, I'm putting a few squares of Velcro a couple inches apart from each other on both sides. You can use snap clips or a different closure if you want something more secure, but I find Velcro works just fine. And when you're doing this, make sure that you put it on the top of the wearer's right side and the bottom of the wearer's left side. So when it's worn, this will put the left panel on top. And here's what that looks like finished. Onto the outer tunic. For this, you'll need about 3 yards of your fabric of choice, plus a couple inches of Velcro. The pattern that I used for this started out as this simplicity pattern that I got ages ago, but I have altered quite a bit over time. You could pretty easily make this from a shirt pattern the same way as we did the inner tunic. Start with a general shirt shape, and then flare out a few inches at the waist. And the bottom of your tunic should fall to about mid-thigh. The bottom of the tunic that I'm making here is pretty square, but I've also made them rounder. That part's just up to personal preference. And your outer tunic should generally be pretty shapeless, but I have seen other cosplayers add darts to accommodate curves so they aren't just swimming in it. And your sleeve should be pretty loose and long enough to cover most of your hand. And lastly, you'll need the neckband. Same as with the inner tunic, it's 5 inches wide by the length of your neckline. This can be 2 pieces with a seam at the center back if you need to. Again, whatever works for you. Once you have your pattern, cut 2 fronts, 2 sleeves, 1 neckband, and 1 back on the fold. Mark, fold, and iron the neckband the same way as we did before. Starting with the shoulders, we're going to lay the front panels on the back piece, right side to right side. Pin and stitch along the shoulder seams. Just like with the inner tunic, I'm trimming with pinking shears and folding down the seam allowance towards the back and top stitching. Once again, if you're using a different fabric, you're welcome to skip this step or finish it off a different way. Next, I'm going to pin the sleeves to the main body, right sides together, and stitch that down the same way. And I'm pushing my seam allowances towards the main body. Now I'm going to pin along the sleeve and side seam and sew it shut. Again, since I can't fold this over, I'm going to go over it with a zigzag stitch to help reinforce it. Next up, I'm putting on the tunic to mark where my natural waist is. This is where our Velcro closure is going to sit and be hidden by our belt. Next, I'll iron the neck banding down 1/2 inch on either side and then in half. Starting at the center back, I'm pinning the neck banding to the tunic with the right side of the band to the wrong side of the tunic. Once the first side is attached, I'm going to put the tunic back on and mark my waist on the neck banding. This should match up with where you marked on the tunic itself. And make sure you mark both sides. Cut out and sew 2 inches of Velcro and lay it on what will be the underside of the banding. Sew its other half to the front tunic panel, and then mirror on the other side. Same as on the inner tunic, make sure that the Velcro is on the underside of the left panel and the top of the right panel. Once that's done, you can fold under the front side of the neck banding and top stitch. I also top stitched the other side and down the center. You don't technically have to do this, but I like how it looks. I'm hemming the bottom by folding it 1/2 inch twice, the same way as the inner tunic, but if you want a prettier hem, you can do that here. And same with the sleeves. And here is the finished tunic. I also wanted to show my other robes. Everything's the same except that the bottom is a little bit more rounded and it has a wider hem. Next up is the obi belt. This is basically just one big rectangle. For this, you're going to need around half a yard of your fabric of choice, plus about a quarter yard of either interfacing or a lining fabric. I used some cotton in a similar color that I had left over from another project. You'll also need about 8 inches of Velcro. Cut 2 rectangles from your main fabric that are about 3 inches longer than your waist measurement and 6 inches wide. Cut 1 matching rectangle from your lining. Lay your lining piece on one of your main pieces and stitch it down with a basting stitch, a little less than half an inch from the edge. Depending on your fabric, you can forgo pinning this, but mine was sliding around a lot and it just made it easier for me. Along the short edge of that rectangle, I'm laying 2 4-inch pieces of Velcro side by side, 1 inch from the short edge, and 1 inch from both the top and the bottom. Stitch those down with the hook side on one of the rectangles and the matching fuzzy side on the other. Next, lay both rectangles on top of each other, right sides together, with the Velcro sides on opposite ends. Leave 3 or 4 inches open and stitch around the whole thing with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Trimming the seams with pinking shears to help prevent fraying, and then turning it right sides out. Last up is to iron it flat and close that gap. You can top stitch this or hand sew it if you want it more hidden. And here is the finished obi. Next up are the tabards. The style I'm making here are generally referred to as Y tabards since they make the shape of a Y. To start, you're going to need about 2 or 3 yards of your fabric of choice. You'll also need about the same amount of either interfacing or a lining fabric. Again, I just used some cotton in a similar color that I had left over. You'll also need 10 pairs of snap clips if you want your tabards to be removable. To make this pattern, I cut out 2 long strips of paper that were 5 inches wide. I laid one from my shoulder to the center of my natural waist, and then hung another straight down. I taped these 2 pieces together, and traced that onto one paper, then added a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I used the top section to determine the length of my top half. This won't change even if I alter the bottom. You can lengthen or shorten your bottom section, but it should be generally equal to or a little bit longer than the bottom hem of your outer tunic. I made mine square, but you can make the bottom edge whatever shape you like. However you set it up, you should end up with a pattern that looks something like this. If you have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, the whole thing should be 6 inches wide. You'll need 4 panels of your main fabric and 2 panels of your lining fabric. And these should not have any visible seams, so at least 2 of them will need to be continuous. For the lining and the underside, I'm adding a 1/2 inch seam allowance where the fold would be and cutting out 2 separate pieces. And the first thing I'm doing is sewing these right sides together. I'm ironing the seams open and then top stitching the seam allowance down for some extra strength and to keep everything in place later on. I'm going over everything with the iron once more, and then laying one of the linings on one of the main panels. I'm putting my lining piece on the piece that will be the underside later. Tack those in place with a basting stitch all the way around, a little bit less than 1/2 inch from the edge, and then repeat so that you have 2 of these. So I'm making my tabards removable, but if you're planning to attach yours permanently, you can skip this step. On my underside panel, I'm making marks for my snaps, 1.5 inches from each edge, and then 3/4 of an inch from each other. And I put my lining on my underside piece specifically so that the snaps would have more to hold on to. And for this, I'm using 2 different sizes of snaps because that's what I had, but feel free to use whatever, obviously. And while I'm sewing the snaps on, I'm putting the extra end just into the other piece so that I don't lose them. Once all those snaps are sewn on, I'm laying the panels right sides together and sewing them closed. Make sure to leave a gap so you can turn them right sides out. I put my gap near my bend so they can just be hidden under my belt. I'm trimming mine with pinking shears and reinforcing that seam. Lastly, iron the whole thing and close those holes. I just did a top stitch here since it'll be hidden under my belt, but you can hand sew it to make it prettier. Lastly, I did a couple wide zigzag stitches at the bends to connect the 2 halves. Be very careful that you don't twist your pieces around when you do this. And then to finish it off, I'm going to grab my outer tunic and put the other half of the snap clips along the shoulder seam. Again, I like having my tabard and tunic as 2 separate pieces, but if you're not planning to swap them out, obviously you can just stitch them to each other. Lastly, I'm going to make my cloak. For this, I mostly followed the blue cloak pattern from the same bundle I showed for the outer tunic. I did make the hood a bit bigger and a bit rounder. You can use whatever cloak pattern you like, as long as the bottom hem falls to ankle length, the hood falls to mid-back, and the sleeves flare out and cover your whole arm. For this, you're going to need around 8 yards of your fabric of choice. The pattern that I'm using here is the same in the front and the back, just with different necklines. I'm cutting out 2 backs with a 1/2 inch seam allowance added, plus 2 fronts. If your fabric is wide enough, you can cut out 1 back piece on the fold, but mine wasn't. First up, I'm marking 1/2 inch from that center seam on the back piece all the way down. I'm also scribbling on the right side so I don't get them mixed up. And I'm closing my center back seam with a flat felled seam. I'll leave a link in the description on how to do that. After that, I'm going to mark the side seams and close both of those with flat felled seams as well. I somehow lost the footage, but I'm also sewing the shoulder seams right sides together at this point. I couldn't fit flat felled seams here, so I just did a regular straight stitch and folded it over like I did with the tunics. Once the main body is done, I'm trying on the cloak to mark out where I want my bottom hem to be. When I made this, I forgot that I hadn't already shortened my pattern, so I had a lot of extra fabric here. The bottom hem of your cloak should fall to ankle length, or 1 inch or so off the floor. I'm trimming the bottom of my cloak to be 2.5 inches longer than my final length will be. Then I'm going to mark and pin it to have a 2-inch hem like shown. Now that the main body is done, I'm moving on to the hood. I started with the hood that came with my pattern, but I made it tall enough that it would fall to the middle of my back when it's down and will cover my entire shoulders when it's up. I'm cutting out 2 pieces and sewing right sides together along the center curved seam. I started out with a regular straight stitch, then finished it off by trimming off half of one side of the seam allowance and folding it over the other, and top stitching. This is technically another version of a flat felled seam. I'll also leave a link to a tutorial for this style. I'm also sewing darts at the base of the hood here. Next, I'm going to pin the hood to the neckline of the cloak and stitch that on, right sides together. With the same fabric as the rest of the cloak, I'm cutting a piece 2 inches wide and a few inches longer than the neckline. Technically, this should be cut on the bias, but I didn't have a piece big enough. This worked fine though. Fold the strip in half lengthwise and iron. Then fold the edges in and iron again to essentially make a strip of double fold bias tape. And then I'm using it just like bias tape to cover up that neckline seam. Pin the right side of the bias tape to the wrong side of the hood and stitch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance along that fold. Then fold the tape over and top stitch along the other edge. And now that seam is fully enclosed. Onto the sleeves. I didn't do anything to alter the original pattern I used for these besides shortening it. If you're altering a different pattern or making one, be sure that the bottom of the sleeve is about as wide as it is long. Fold the sleeve in half, right sides together, and pin along the side seam. I'm doing this with a regular straight stitch and finishing the seam off with a mock serger stitch. Again, this is just what worked best for the fabric that I was using. If you're using something that frays more or less, you can finish it off a different way. And now I'm putting the sleeves into the armholes, right sides together, and pinning everything in place. Just like with the hood, I'm going over this with a straight stitch, then trimming one side of the seam allowance and folding the other side over the short one and top stitching. I'm marking my wrist with my arm extended out straight and using that to show where I want the bottom of my sleeve to be. I'm trimming the bottom of the sleeve to be 2.5 inches longer than this. And I'm doing a 2-inch hem the same way as before. Mark at 1 inch, 2.5 inches, and 4.5 inches from the edge. Fold the edge to the first line, and then bring that fold up to the third line. Lastly, I'm marking and hemming the front and the hood the same way, and ironing all of my hems down. And that is the finished cloak. Lastly, there's a bit of Jedi gear you're going to need to get elsewhere. Starting with the boots. You'll need either black or brown knee-high boots with minimal embellishing. I got mine secondhand for around $10. You'll also need your utility belt. Mine is a cheap one that I got online and weathered with watered-down acrylic paint, although there are sellers online that make real leather ones. This is basically a thin belt with a thinner belt on top and a buckle in the middle. It should also have a cover over the closure in the back. Your belt also should be the same color as your boots, so either black or brown. On your belt, you'll need at least 2 pouches. Mine are leather ammo pouches from a military surplus store on eBay, but you can also get resin pouches. These do need to be the same color as your utility belt. You'll also need at least 4 food capsules on your belt. Again, I bought mine pre-made, but these are pretty easy to 3D print or make with pen caps. Lastly, I have 2 CoverTech lightsaber clips on my belt, which brings me to my lightsabers. Mine are both from Fire Sabers, but there are quite a few places to get these online. And now to put everything together. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know down below what I should make next, and I'll see you all soon. Bye!